So let's have some fun Q&A. There are the microphones. The microphones are all the way in the front. It means you got to do the perp walk. I apologize for that. I would have put the microphones halfway back. And I will answer any questions, but they have to be true or false questions. Go ahead. I'm kidding. That's a joke. Yeah.
I would love to know your take on why the heck is the church so quiet these days, and what needs to happen in order to wake them up?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I mean, the bottom line, I mean, you can phrase it 1,000 ways, but it's bad theology, okay? Now, I'm not like a big theologian, but it's bad theology. What the gospel says is different from what a lot of Christians have practiced through history. For example, going back to Bonhoeffer, okay, they all had this big Romans 13 idea that, well, whatever the government says, we got to do it, you know, because the church and the state, they didn't have separation of church and state, and the state was good, it was a Christian state, and whatever. So there's like whatever the state says, but whoopsie daisy, Hitler is now the head of the state, so you might have to rethink that, right? Bonhoeffer rethought it. But most of the people in the pews and most of the pastors didn't get it. They didn't understand that the church has a responsibility to speak against the state, that there's a price. Now, it cuts both ways because, you know, today you have two kinds of ways to get it wrong in the church, right? You have people that are woke. So what that really means is they do not have a biblical worldview. They're deeply confused about some issues. They want to talk about like their pet thing, whatever it is, environmentalism or racism, whatever. Like, hey, these are real things, but you've got to focus on the Jesus way of dealing with everything. And if you get all stuck on that, you know, and we've lost a lot of people to that, and it's gruesome. I mean, there are churches all over America, you know, putting up like rainbow flags, and they're putting up BLM stuff and whatever. And it reminds me of the church in Germany in the 30s, where way before the death camps, they're all putting swastikas out there. Why? Because they're like, hey, we don't want you to bother us. We're cool. Don't burn us down. Stormtroopers or whatever, don't bother us. They kind of want to go along to get along. They just want to, you know, pay their blood money and put up the flag. Now, you know, it's okay. We're called to love people that are different from us. We're called to love people in a gay lifestyle and stuff like that. But that's different from saying we approve of that idea. Because if you do that, you're hurting people. And so you've got woke people that are doing that. And again, people can do whatever they want to do. But if you want to be a Christian, you know, you don't get a choice on that. God has a certain view of sexuality and certain basic things. And so that's kind of the woke thing. But then you have people on the other side. And in Germany, it was exactly the same. You had conservatives and liberals both not getting it. And the conservatives are people that I revere, like John Piper just wrote an article, which to me, you know, it just proves that you could be that brilliant and still miss important things. And the way I see it, it's the opposite of kind of the liberal woke thing. It's the conservative pietistic thing, right? Like, I'm way too holy, like, to vote for that guy, you know? And I don't want to dirty my hands. And so to be pure and justified before God, I'm going to let everything go to hell, and I'm going to be thrilled when it goes to hell, because then I can preach my gospel and we'll all be persecuted and the end will come. If that's what God wants, I'm all in, but I don't think that's what God wants. And so people have this idea, and the Germans had it too. They were like, you know what? I'm such a serious Christian that if a Gestapo guy comes and says, are you hiding a Jew in your basement? I would say, oh, I can't lie. I want to be justified before God. I want to be pure. So please, yes, I'm hiding a Jew. Come kill the Jew, and I'll be justified before God. And I'm wonderful because I'm a real Christian. That's kind of conservative, pietistic, wrong-headed theology. And on the other side is the woke theology. We have the same thing happening in the church today, which blows my mind. When I wrote my Bonhoeffer book, I knew that it was a prophetic thing. I didn't think of it. I told you, I never get these brilliant ideas, and I just do something, and then as I'm doing it, I realize, holy cow, so 10 years ago that book came out, and to me, if you read it now, it's a stunning thing, because you see these things, you think, oh, it'll never happen in America. Well, it won't happen the same way. But why? Or what, do we think we're better than the German Christians were? We are just as susceptible to those things. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to share something. My parents had accents too. So,
Shame on them.
yes.
They should speak like good Americans.
Both my parents came here from Italy.
Yeah.
And so I know what it is and I understand my parents were so poor, my mom would wash clothes in the creek in her hometown. And my dad, you said your parents couldn't go to school, your dad couldn't go to school. My dad couldn't go to school because he had no shoes to wear. So that, or books, because they were too poor to buy it. So when he came here, he lived the American dream. It's, you know, your story touches my heart because I understand, you know, living through it. And so my daughter approached him, and we're pro-legal immigration. My dad came here legally. And so my daughter told him, said, "Nonna, what would you have done if you didn't marry Nonna?" And he goes, "Oh, I'll stay here."
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, we need to share these stories because I think that, again, we need the perspective of the outsiders because we have been so blessed. It's always the case, right? We're so blessed, we have no clue that we're blessed. We need to get reminded. A little persecution with like pretty boy governors is a good thing for the church because it wakes us up. Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I have a question about, I grew up loving journalism and writing. I really related to your story about being in college and being the artsy type because that was me, right? With my little...
I hope you married a banker.
What's that?
Nothing. It hasn't been financially easy, the writing life, you know.
It has not.
I got this jacket off eBay, so...
Now
people think I'm joking. No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now I'm a first grade teacher, so I'm still poor.
Yeah.
But my question is, a little preface to it is, you know, I grew up loving journalism and loving those people that sought the truth, right? And I'm looking at journalism today, right? And I'm looking at journalists, and something can be so blatantly untrue, but they still, something can be so blatantly true, right? Like riots.
Well, it's right that we're shocked by what has happened to so-called journalism because I've noticed it. I mean, look, the journalistic world roughly since the 60s has been drifting left, but what happened in the last 4 years is staggering. We need to know. My wife and I canceled our subscription to the New York Times when COVID hit, and I have to say, because I literally finally got to the point where I could no longer bear reading the headlines because they were that skewed.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, it's a sign of how bad things are, that something that fundamental, it's like your courts, whatever, this is a fundamental thing. And I'm not sure, well, ask your question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to
Well, my question is, will the pendulum ever swing the other way? I mean, like you said, it's just like we're living the 60s all over again. But will we ever come to like some middle ground, or is this just going to be how it's going to be?
The answer is, for sure, nobody knows, but I can tell you it doesn't matter because we know what our job is. Our job is to pray and to fast and pray and to work to do what is right. And I have to say that, I believe that we have enough freedom in America. This is why if you don't use your freedom, if you don't vote, wow, shame on you, because what we have is so precious. We still have, the difference between what we have here and what they had in Germany in the 30s is that they didn't have any tradition of this kind of freedom that we have. So it's not such a shock that they were able to make those incredibly horrible mistakes. But what would our excuse be when we have had a tradition and when we have the lesson of Bonhoeffer and Germany of the 30s? They didn't have a lesson like that. We have that lesson. I really believe it's why the Lord called me to write that book. It was not some bright idea I had. But the point is that we are to fight with all our might and main, and we are to trust God, and God commands us to be hopeful. And if we go, it's like the people in the Soviet Gulag, the people in prisons in China, the people in prisons in North Korea. God commands them to rejoice in him always. Now think about that. We never have an excuse not to be hopeful and joyful in the secret presence of Jesus in our lives, and God will deal with the results. So whether we swing back or not, I'm hopeful, but we have to really, really fight. We have to fight as hard as we can and pray as hard as we can, and then the results are in the Lord's hands. It's not about winning, it's about obedience. So, yes, sir.
Hi, so just following up to your French comment. So when you become Christian, are you also French because you have to surrender to God?
I didn't actually, now that, I didn't hear the last part of that. When you become a Christian, what?
Oh, I'm sorry. When you become Christian, do you also become French because you have to surrender to God? You know?
Because I missed this.
Never mind.
Oh, I think I get it.
Okay.
I think I get it. Actually, I got to tell you, I wasn't kidding. In February, I have a book coming out, which is the story of my life until I came to faith, and it's about my parents and a lot of stuff that I shared with you. And I always remember my father would, kind of judge every European nation on how they fought in World War II. That was, the way, right? So he had huge respect for the Germans, even though they were the evil enemy. It's like they're an amazing military might. He had huge respect for the Greeks, who actually did acquit themselves incredibly heroically, and on and on and on. And then you go down the line, the Italians were kind of a joke. And then he came to the French, and he said, the French said, when Hitler, invaded, they said, "Mr. Hitler, right this way." So that's a cheap, actually, that's, I realize that that's not as true as the joke makes it sound. But
yeah, sorry.
Thank you for
that wasn't the real
thank
question.
you for helping me to get your joke.
Sure.
It was a really mean-spirited joke, but go ahead. Yeah.
So a lot of my fellow cohorts are kind of conservative millennials.
A lot of your fellow...
cohort, like...
Do you say cohort?
Yes.
I hate that word.
Okay.
Strike that from the record. Go ahead. No, but that's like one of those millennial words, cohort. Like what? I'm sorry. I'm just messing with you now. Go ahead. Stop.
It's Roman.
Stop.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
So conservative millennials, right? So
yeah.
They a lot of my friends are, or the people I know are kind of disenfranchised with the Republican kind of what's going on right now politically.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Why are we that way? And then secondly, how do we fix it?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I think that sometimes people just don't get stuff, and there's nothing you can do. I think we need to do whatever we can, but I think, look, I have lost friends over my support of this president, and that actually breaks my heart, because I would never say to somebody, you can't be my friend because you disagree with me. So that's actually telling to me that I would not push somebody away, unless they're nasty or whatever, and I've already effectively ended the friendship. But there are many people on that side that are doing that. And I just think that's interesting, because we're supposed to love our enemies. I also think that a lot of people are, you kind of believe what you want to believe. I mean, there are people that honestly, firmly believe every bad thing you've heard about Trump. Now, if you actually believed those things, I guess, you would think he's the devil or Hitler 2.0, and you'd even vote for somebody as horrible as Joe Biden, because you'd think, well, you couldn't be worse than Trump, right? So, so I don't know what to say other than we just have to, it's like talking about somebody who hates God and is angry at the church. We know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do what we're supposed to do, and we know that it's in God's hands. God loves everyone equally, and listen, if I could vote the way I voted and then eventually come to see some things, we need to love people that are different than we are, show them the love of Jesus, and do our best. But there's no magic bullet. We're going through a tough time in this country, and my only hope is that we can kind of hang on, because I think if we can hang on, I think if this president can get reelected, I think if we can have courts that believe in the Constitution, we will be okay. But if we don't, we won't be okay. So I am concerned, and I think that when folks like that have kids or whatever, you begin to see some things differently. I don't know, but I just know that we have to be hopeful, positive. We have to pray and do what we can do. Thank you. Yes, sir. Now, I think no, we're not going to have any more room, so the last people in line has to be the last person, because I just realized, he's like, I just got in time. But you're going to be the last questioner, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure on you. You better think. So, and please keep your questions brief, because I do want to get to everybody. So, yes, sir.
Yes, Eric, when I was in high school, there was a famous scientist engineer who my sister's boyfriend was going to the University of Houston while I was in high school, and I followed the space program all throughout high school, and I was a fan of all of the scientists and engineers, and I was just totally in love with the Apollo space program. Followed it, and my sister's boyfriend told me, "Hey, Werner von Braun is coming to the University of Houston to give a speech."
Yeah.
And he says, "George, would you like to go?" And of course, I jumped at it, and I idolized this man.
Sure.
And then later on in high school, months later, one of my student friends said, "Hey, George, didn't you know that Werner von Braun was a Nazi, and he worked for Hitler in the World War II effort against the Allies and all that?" And when he told me that, and I finally realized that, all of the idolization that I had for him, it had sunk. In your research, in all of the books you've written, has a similar kind of thing happened to you?
With who?
With any of the subjects that you've researched and perhaps admired?
Well, I mean, my view, look, I adored Churchill, but my view of him did dip when I realized how he treated, Bonhoeffer's cohort of people trying to go against, like he kind of gave them the back of his hand, and I thought, wow, that's just, like a black mark in his book. So it's interesting. But the Werner von Braun thing is interesting too, because this is another reason to be a Christian. We live in an extremely dirty world. And when you see stuff like that, right, when you think of Churchill and FDR on the stage, on the aircraft carrier or at Yalta with Stalin, you realize we live in a filthy, filthy, broken, sinful world. And some of the deals that we have to make are ugly. And so you can imagine, the post-war American leaders thinking, hey, there's some geniuses over there, and if we don't get them, the Soviet Union will get them. And that is true. And so, they made that dirty deal. And so, I think apart from Jesus, it's ugly.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
How would you recommend you raise children to be patriotic without raising them in a bubble, or worse, indoctrinating them?
I believe in indoctrination. Yes. Actually, it's kind of funny. That's not really true. But one thing that I have learned, I mean, we just have one daughter. She's 21. But, if I had some things to do over again, it is interesting that parents have tremendous power over their kids, which usually in America they don't exert. And I have seen some parents exert that power and force their kids to do this and that, and it blesses the kids, and the kids later on appreciate it. And I think that, look, you can't, it's kind of like we were talking about religion and faith. You can't force it. We know that. But when you love radically, when you love your kids radically, it's really hard to resist that. It's hard to blow it off. It will haunt them if they go the wrong way. But if you're an overbearing, religious, pharisaical parent, raise your hand if you're one of those parents. Raise your hand. We've got a couple in, I know. You're clearly going to push your kid away from God. So it's a real dance. But I do think, practically speaking, doing everything you can, visit battlefields. There's just a million things you can do to get them to learn history and whatever. And some kids will take to it better than others. But it is a balance. But I think that teaching them history or, maybe getting them out of public school if possible, or taking a really firm hand. And I mean, not everybody can, and there's some great teachers in public schools, we know, but we also know it's tough. It's an uphill battle. So that's a non-answer, but a great question. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for your ministry. What's your opinion on immigrants that don't hold American ideals? Should they be let in, for example, devout Muslims, where their religion mandates that a country like this shouldn't exist and is evil?
That's a great question, because there are limits to religious liberty, right? In other words, that's the interesting thing about the founders. And so in 1960, when JFK is on the ballot, there were a lot of people that legitimately said, wait a minute, is he the kind of a Catholic who's beholden to the Pope so that he can't? In other words, the idiocy that came out of Senator Feinstein's mouth toward Amy Coney Barrett, nonetheless, has precedent where when we didn't know if there weren't a lot of Catholics in your world or whatever, you'd say, well, are they gonna enforce what they believe, or are they gonna follow the rule of law and do what they believe? And so religion and religious liberty has limits. I mean, if my religion says that if my daughter kisses the wrong guy, I can kill her, the government will step in and say, no, you can't, and we're not gonna give that to you. Religious liberty only goes so far. And I think that living in New York, seeing a lot of Muslims, you see they love America. And so it's obvious that they have been able to compartmentalize, a certain part of their faith or whatever. And I think that's ultimately the question. I would say that most faiths, if you take them to their extreme, would push against the idea of being able to love America. But there's no question that there are tons of cultural Muslims, and I know many of them, and they're cultural Muslims. They love America and whatever, and they don't buy into the radical idea that it has to be a theocracy or Sharia law or anything like that. They're not good with that. So maybe you call them bad Muslims, but the point is that they get it. They understand that what we have is good, and they're not willing to follow the tenets of whatever branch of their faith in that direction. Now, we've got a lot of cultural Christians, too. Who don't have a clue what they believe, and they say, well, I'm a Christian, whatever. So it's kind of complicated, but I would say at its core, the Christian faith leads to liberty. In other words, at its core, the Christian faith says you cannot force faith. Now, many Christians have tried to force faith. Many Christians have killed those who don't agree with them. In other words, I'm not saying that Christians haven't done it, but the point is, at its core, the gospel does not mandate that. And as time has passed, I think as we've worked it out more and more and more, we've seen that that is the case. So if you have a Christian who believes in theocracy, you'd say, well, you can't. It doesn't. The Christian faith does not allow for theocracy. But again, there have been Christians who have been guilty of that. So it's kind of complicated. But I do think it's important that we understand people have to assimilate to the American way of life, and it may mean giving up certain tenets of their faith, and that's the question: is where's that line? And as you know, some judge someplace a couple of years ago was saying to somebody who said, I can't really celebrate same-sex marriage, and the judge said, well, tough luck, being an American means setting that aside. In that case, I would say that judge is wrong, and that's the kind of stuff that we have to figure out at this point, is where are those lines? Where does religious liberty and every kind of liberty bump up against people's faith? So that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a point, and then I have a question for you. I just want you all to know that I've dedicated the last 5 years of my life to freedom, faith, and family as a cohort with President Donald J. Trump. I have taken slings and arrows unbelievable to most human beings, but I did it because I saw where we were headed. I have 4 children, so the mom that asks about children, they watch what you do, not do what you say. So lead with a clean heart and good spirit for freedom, faith, and family at all times. For the boy that was talking about the Republican Party, President Trump is taking down the entire Democrat Party, as well as getting rid of the dead weight in our Republican Party. He is the least racist president we have had since Abraham Lincoln.
And if you don't believe it, just ask him.
Yes.
Right? My favorite thing that Trump has ever said, I just find him so funny. Like, to me, the funniest thing he's ever said is that I've done more for black people than any president ever, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. And you're like, I think he's joking. I hope he's joking.
But
Anyway, I'm sorry. What's your
that's
question,
okay.
Rosie?
Lastly, as a suburban woman, we're going to flip California. Get out there. Get people voting. Let's go. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, my question. I'm helping the team. I'm actually meeting Ivanka tomorrow. My number one worry is medical tyranny of our freedom, okay? Because COVID will soon be, you can't go shopping without showing us all of your vaccinations. You can't get on an airplane. You can't do this. You can't do that. I need suggestions as far as how we can move this ball forward.
Well, the first thing I would say is civil disobedience. Like, you just don't put up with it. Push back. Just totally push back. Here's the issue. If a lot of people push back, there's no way they can enforce it. But if only a few people push back, they can pick us off. That's what they do. And so that's the story in Germany that Chuck Colson would quote the sociologist that they call it the spiral of silence. In other words, if only a few people say anything, then everybody loses the courage to speak, and it gets worse and worse. But the more you speak up and the more you push back, I mean, I was running, I run sometimes, and I was running up Madison Avenue like early in the COVID thing, and you know, if you're running, you can't run with a mask, like you'll die. So I'm running, and some woman cursed at me, and she's like, "Put on your effing mask," blah, 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 blah. And because I was raised by crazy Europeans, I stopped, I turned around, and I said, "What did you say?" I said, "Don't talk to me that way." You know, in other words, I pushed back. And when you push back, you have to understand, if everybody would do that, she would not do what she did. But most people would be like, "Oh, sorry," and they put the mask on. We have to know what is right and wrong, and we have to stand up for what is right. I didn't slug the woman, okay? But the point is that I made the point that I'm an adult. You don't talk to me that way. You don't curse at me that way. And by the way, you're wrong. I didn't tell her, but by the way, you're wrong. I can't like run and be wearing a mask. I'm not walking, you know, like, but I'm saying that we must have the American spirit. We have to be alive to liberty, and we have to push back. And when people just docilely go along, we have to educate them that we don't do that here. We are free, and if you do not exercise your freedom, you deserve to lose it. And so I'm just convinced that when it comes to stuff like this, I mean, we've got to do a million things. We've got to do stuff like talk to leaders like Ivanka Trump, obviously. We've got to vote. We've got to do everything we can do, but in our own lives. And look, I'm not talking about just being a sawed-off jerk wherever you go, right? But I'm saying that I think Americans kind of are too easygoing sometimes, you know? And I even say, I'm driving with my wife, if somebody like really cuts me off, like really grievously, I will like lean on the horn. And the reason I do that is because I say, if everyone did that when they do that, they would stop doing that. But most Americans are like, "Oh, I'll let it go," you know, or they have some false idea of grace. You're not blessing that person. If you let them know that was wrong, they won't do it the next time, where they understand that there's a price to pay if you behave that way. But we have to live that out, and we can't, you know, just kind of say like, "Oh, I just want to get along with everybody." If that's your goal in life, you're not really going to be a particularly heroic person. So thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Eric, for your vision for America, and thanks so many foreigners that come here and see the spirit of America, whether it's Dinesh D'Souza or Colin Gunn and these people that make documentary movies. Thank God for these people.
Or Tocqueville.
Right.
I mean, come on.
The French.
Like, they're like,
right.
what is going on over here? It's amazing. Yeah.
So my question is, do you see us racing towards this tipping point, and is there more hope maybe than we think? For example.
Is there more what?
Hope. Hope.
Hope.
Hope.
than we think, yeah.
Yes. So when Bloomberg and Koch, the left and the right, both got together recently and said, there's a free speech problem at Yale and at the Ivy Leagues, that gives me hope. When I see
Bloomberg said that?
Bloomberg and Koch.
If a jerk like Bloomberg. No, it's kind of funny that, this is, I joke around. That's the beauty of America, is that somebody you can disagree with on all kinds of stuff, they can get something right and they should be praised for it. And I have to say that that's the kind of leadership that we need. And when people will speak up, people with that kind of power, how many don't speak up? I have to say, at a place like Yale, when the dean Christakis and his wife, a few years ago, they were like cursed out by this like brazen young woman. I thought she should have been expelled on the spot, and the administration should have stood up and said, like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen here again. You better not do that. They didn't do that, because since 1968 in Columbia University, the craven college administrators, they don't believe in anything. And if the students are really angry, they're like, oh, what do we know? We're just like stupid adults, right? It's the same thing, right? Like white males are stupid, and then in the 60s, like everybody over 30 is stupid, whatever. That is a worldview. That is a Rousseauian worldview. It is utterly false. Every culture in the world knows that the older you are, the more wisdom you're likely to have. And most cultures in world history have understood that. But what's happened since the 60s, and it goes back to Marcuse, and it goes back and back and back. These are just basically wrong ideas, fundamentally illiberal leftism. They don't get that. And so they don't have any real belief, and they don't know how to push back. And I think to myself that that's really up to the church. You have no idea of the butterfly effect. One person doing one thing, you don't know what is going to happen. And I really think that that's one reason that I think that most universities they're dying, and the COVID thing is going to make it much worse. Praise God, because they have done an unbelievably horrible job. They have wasted American money, and they have turned out little Stalinists. And I have to say that it's so in terms of hope, again, it's up to each of us. How much hope do we have? How much hope are we willing to exercise? So thank you. All right, yes, sir.
So my question is, remember the question that came up right before him? So it has to do with that, like the lady.
Okay, and if I don't remember that question, does it still have to do with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the lady that she was talking about that that she thinks that medical they want to take our rights away.
Right.
And then you told her that if lots of people stand up against it, then it's going to go away. But as far as I've seen, so far there aren't lots of people who are standing up against it.
Well, you're right. You're right, and you're not right. It depends where you look. The media is not portraying those people. They're not showing you those people. And I think we have to encourage each other that is the right thing to do. And I also think this is where your ultimate values come into play, right? In other words, notice how they use death. It's like, you're going to die. You're going to die. It's like, yeah, I know I'm going to die. Like, no one who's ever lived has not died. So the only question is, what happens after I die? If I believe in Jesus, then actually he defeated death, and so I get never to die, and so I'm not as afraid of death. But if they can hang that over your head, oh, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. It's fear-mongering. Let's face it, okay? They're talking about particular kinds of death. They don't care about, suicide, people having horrible... it goes on and on and on. So this is a power grab, and we are, as Americans, in a way, for the first time, having to deal with this issue of what happens when somebody hangs this over your head and says, oh, you better do this, or, so we're having to think for ourselves, we're having to make decisions, and, there's no law against smoking. I don't think smoking is a good idea, but if people want to smoke, they can smoke. There's no law against a lot of things that are bad and dangerous and whatever, and we're free Americans. And I think that we have to figure out that balance. But what they're doing now is they're saying, well, it's about other people. If you don't do this, it'll affect other people and stuff. And so I think we have to kind of work this out. It's not going to be easy, but we need to know that there are people who maybe they're not even doing it intentionally. It's just their instinct to say, I know what's right, and I'm going to tell you how to behave. And as Americans, we have to say, well, I don't think you're right, and I'm not going to give you the right to tell me how to behave because this is a free country, and we have to work that out. But if we don't understand what freedom is and how it works, and this is a great lesson for America, because for so long we haven't even had to think about these kinds of things, and we're being forced to think about them. And suddenly you realize what it is to have a really dippy governor, for example. Like in the past, you're kind of like, well, it doesn't make that big of a difference, taxes, whatever. The judgment of a man or woman, if they really lack wisdom, it can suddenly really affect you. And I think that's been good for Americans to understand, like, whoa, I better vote for my mayor, I better vote against that guy or that woman or whatever. And somebody said it earlier, but listen, folks, the idea, this bad theology that many Christians seem to have, that it doesn't matter how they vote, that's from the pit of hell. And if Christians do not vote, honestly, shame on them, because that really is affecting everybody. And we have a responsibility to vote our biblical values. So anyway, I hope I gave some semblance of an answer to your question. I have a sense I didn't.
I didn't ask a question.
Oh, you didn't even ask the question. All right, now it really does have to be a true or false question, or multiple choice. Go ahead.
Okay. So, what should people do to spread what they're doing? I mean, you can stand up to someone and say, no, I'm not going to wear a mask in your shop or something, but people won't see you do that. It's not like somebody's going to film you and put you on Facebook and you're going to go worldwide.
I think there are 100 answers to this. In other words, there's a million things we can do, and everybody has a different calling and different talents and different spheres of influence, and we have to use whatever God has given us. And some people do things on social media. Some people do things just in their family or in their community. So we really have to ask the Lord to lead us in these kinds of things, because there's a million things that each of us can do. But that's a wonderful question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Eric? Love your show. Especially
Thank
when
you.
You got John Smirak.
Smirak's the best.
Yeah.
John Smirak.
Hey,
I didn't even mention that. I have a radio show. I hope, actually, you know what? No joke, because I always forget to say this. I beg you all, please, go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, just my name, ericmetaxas.com, and it says to sign up for my newsletter. Every week, we send out a newsletter with every single one of the videos of these amazing guests that I have. And I promise you, when you get that newsletter, half the time you're going to go, holy cow, I want to hear that one. You might not want to hear all of them, but I promise you, I've had such an array of amazing guests, but you wouldn't know it, and you don't need to go searching and stuff, but please just go to ericmetaxas.com, sign up for the newsletter. If you hate it, you can unsubscribe, but I promise you, we don't abuse it, and I'm dying to spread the message. When I get some great guests, I'm thinking, oh, I just wish everybody knew about this. And of course, all my closest friends and relatives, they're the worst. They do not subscribe to the newsletter. So don't be like them. Don't be like them. Yes, sir.
Okay. So I know you voted for Dukakis. You know what? I got you beat. I voted for Jerry Brown when he had hair because he was dating Linda Rodstand.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're going to tar and feather you. You better get out of here, pal.
Yeah. But what I wanted to ask you is, number one, I thank you for your book, especially if you can keep it. That's probably one of the best things. I use it to teach one of my the classes that I do at church, where we have a little bit of civics in there with the gospel, because that's where our gospel comes from. But the other thing, I want to end on a lighter note. I know you had the pleasure of meeting, obviously, Trump, but you also got to meet Obama. You did the prayer breakfast. I think it was 2012. So tell us some positive things on both of them, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. In 2012, actually, when you go to ericmetaxas.com, at the bottom, there's just a couple of videos right there, and one of them I give my testimony, and the other one is the National Prayer Breakfast speech that I gave in 2012. And it was an interesting thing because I didn't, I got to shake his hand, but it's not like we got to exchange any words, but I got to have the entire breakfast, this is like on no sleep, sitting next to Joe Biden. And it was so bizarre because I couldn't sleep that night because I was so nervous about giving the speech, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really feel nervous, but I just didn't sleep. And imagine being like dizzy with fatigue and being plopped down at 7 a.m. next to Joe Biden and being forced to like try to have a conversation. And I so didn't care about anything because I was just so tired that I brought up, I don't know if you remember, but in the Onion parody newspaper, they made a lot of fun of Biden. And so I brought that up. And like there's one great one of him, it shows him washing his Camaro in the White House driveway and ticking off Obama and stuff, like crazy stuff like that. So I think I brought it up, and the funniest thing is that he got like a little annoyed and said, like, it's so obvious I'm not like that. And I thought, like, whoa, like you are, but I'm not gonna ruin our breakfast any further. But it was kind of crazy. But I will say this, and this is a lesson to me and to all of us. When it was time, the White House photographer never took a picture of me with the president. And I kind of thought, what the heck? Like, I'm the main speaker at the prayer breakfast. Like, it would be nice, like, to have a photo with the president. I've never met a president before. Well, at some point, the president decides to kind of go down the row and to meet everybody on the dais who'd been, up there. And when he comes to me, I'm like, I got my phone out. I'm going to take a selfie with the president. Like, I've got to take a picture. I'm here. When am I going to see him again? Not often, not soon. And so I pull out my phone, and this is just, this is interesting to me because I would never, ever vote for Joe Biden. But there was a human moment where, in an avuncular way, he says, no, give me that, I got that, let me do that. And, he took the picture of me and Obama. And Jesus commands us to love our enemies, to pray for our enemies, and I think sometimes we get caught up in certain things. And that was a real reminder to me that, we're dealing with human beings made in the image of God, and we've got to be careful. I have to be careful. But it was just interesting because it just showed this human side of him that, he was acting like an uncle and just doing this thing. And it kind of touched me, but I'm not voting for him. So, I've actually had the honor of meeting President George W. Bush in his office. He read my Bonhoeffer book and sent me a letter, and I was blown out of the water. And so when I was in Dallas one time, I got to visit with him and chat with him for quite a while. And then, of course, I met Obama that day. But I have met Trump a few times. I don't think he knows who I am. But at the Trump inauguration, there was a church service beforehand, and at the service was sitting Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. And I just couldn't believe it. I ran over, and I was just so excited to meet them because, he was the president of my youth, even though I'm not a fan of his politics either. But he was extremely sweet and stuff. So I feel deeply, deeply honored to have met 4 U.S. President, 5 if you count Millard Fillmore. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your speech tonight. I really appreciated, particularly the reverent sense of humor.
What do you mean? What?
We could talk about it afterwards.
Well.
Okay, anyway. Something that I've been thinking about and kind of struggling with as regarding Christian convictions in politics and voting and deciding what to vote with or not. We've got kind of 2 things going on. We've got the freedom that we enjoy in this country, which of course is built on Christian principles and the Christian worldview. And then we've got the responsibility to vote our Christian convictions.
Right.
And how do you've mentioned it with a couple of other people, how do we make those two work together? I mean, an example, gay marriage. We've got two possibilities with dealing with this. At one point it was illegal. Now it's legal nationwide.
Right.
So as Christians, do we, and I'm not talking specifically about this issue, but some principles behind
well, no,
this.
I need a specific. It's complicated. I mean, it's clearly complicated.
We've got these two options. I'm sorry, just so I get the thought out. We've got the option of saying, do we push to make it illegal again?
Right.
Or do we take more of a perspective like, say, a Ben Shapiro, where the government sucks at everything, get them out of the business of marriage altogether? So we've got those two things as a Christian, with the ultimate goal being able to practice the Christian faith.
Sure.
Yeah, how do you make a decision in that case?
On that, I can guarantee you I don't have an answer. I really... I don't know. I think that there are arguments on both sides. Every issue is different. Also, people are called to different things, and I think that you have to decide what battles God has made you to fight.
I agree, and I'm thinking, would you have a principle or two that we could keep in mind in making that kind of
Well, you'd
decision?
have to give me a specific, you mean on that issue there?
On that issue, yeah, because I mean, that's a big one.
I think probably that's not a battle worth fighting.
Okay.
And I don't think I mean, how do I put this? I think it's so complicated that I shouldn't even comment on it, because it is quite complicated. But I just think that you really have to figure out what has God called you to do. And I think, natural law and that kind of stuff would lead you in a certain direction. But, I mean, everybody has limited time and limited, talents and gifts and stuff. And so it's not really like I know the answer to that. There are many things that I consider wrong, but I can't fix all of them. So I sort of have to, figure out what I can do.
No, that's fair. And however God has called you and your own personal convictions may be the best answer. I know.
I think so. I think there's some things where there is no real answer. You can talk and talk and talk, but I don't. On that one, it's just so complicated that I wouldn't know what to say. I think that I know gay people. They know where I stand on that issue, but they know that I love them because everyone I know who doesn't share my faith has lived in some kind of sexual sin or is living in some kind of sexual sin, what I believe is sexual sin. And, I'm not going to shun them or whatever. But at the same time, within the church, we have to be clear on what the scripture says. And so it's tricky. But in terms of what to do on that, that's anybody's guess.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And I knew there wasn't going to be an easy answer.
Thank you. No, that's a tough one. Right. And this wonderful young man is standing here with the last question. Please be kind.
The question that I had for you, I suppose, is one that I've been thinking through with regards to how we as Christians are perceived as our witness in the world and in culture. I want to think through basically in the godlessness of our culture. I'm thinking even back, I know you love history, and I think back to the revolution that started this country, and you contrast it to something like the French Revolution, which was based on the desire for reason without God. And yet I still value reason. And I am interested in seeing, now that our history is being attacked again, how do we as Christians fight against that which is wrong in our culture without and maybe it's just, I've got to grow a backbone and realize that the culture
That's it.
characterizes.
No, just kidding.
It, yeah, but
no, this is like the question that this other gentleman just asked. There's really no answer. It's very complicated. It is up to each of us to decide. I mean, look, in the last few years, I have become much more politically vocal. I had made a decision before that, this is not my thing necessarily or whatever, but I think it really depends on the times. I think it depends on your own discernment to try to hear from God, what is God calling me to do? And I really believe that, who was I just talking to today? I was talking to a friend today, and I said, there is no question that I have taken a financial bath by supporting Donald Trump. There were people, churches, schools, whatever, inviting me to speak and whatever, and a lot of that went away. But I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I write books about people like Bonhoeffer. So what am I going to do? Make my decisions on that kind of stuff? Do I believe that I need to speak up? And by the way, some people are not that vocal, but I guess I came to the point where I became increasingly vocal because, I believe that we are at that tipping point where it makes that difference. So when somebody like a David French or somebody else says, "Oh, it doesn't matter, you're making a big deal," I think they're totally wrong. I wish they were right. But I think that it's kind of like in a war, you realize this battle is it. We better put all in on this. And if we have to lose 1,000 men, this is the battle. We will lose the war if we don't win this battle. And I think you have to have a discernment about that. And then you have to have a personal discernment about what is God calling me to. And I honestly think that the older you get, the less troubled you are by what people think, in the sense that you will never be able to please everybody. And I think that when I was younger, I still thought, I can please everybody, I'm going to be a good witness, and I can, and you realize, there's nobody better than Tim Tebow, and they mocked him for his faith, right? I don't even have to go to the Jesus thing, and I think they crucified him, right? But Tim Tebow and all these other people, they mocked them. And so I think that it is a balance, and I think that maybe the mistake Christians have made is we're either sour moralists, who really are just bad witnesses, or we react so strongly to not wanting to be a sour moralist that we're afraid to have or to express opinions, which is just as bad in the other direction. And I think that, we need to understand. I mean, for example, there are, Tim Keller, whom I love and revere, wrote an article that was published in the New York Times, of course, basically saying that, Christians cannot be beholden to any political party, right? And 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, that was an important statement. Today, it is a misleading cliche. It is no longer correct, but it's the Christian thing to say, right? I mean, if one party is the Nazi party and the other party is the non-Nazi party, the idea that you're going to say, well, Christians are not, we don't worship political idols, and you can vote as you. I think Christians have an obligation to say, excuse me, sir, in this case, we're in a different situation. This is not a choice between Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan. This is a choice between a party that has over time drifted so far leftward that they are no longer anything like the Democratic Party of previous decades. And how can you ignore that? To ignore that is to put your head in the sand and to pretend that something is true that ain't true. And basically, when I see church leaders do that, it grieves me really deeply, because clearly they know that they're going to pay a huge price if they dare to come out for Trump. That orange bad man, that jughead, that idiot who tweets, you don't want anything to do with him. He'll blow your whole witness, and you've spent decades building up this wonderful reputation. Well, if that's your ultimate value, what can I say? But I really think that, as far as I'm concerned, I just said, hey, God's got my back. I'm going to do what I think is right. And that's what all these heroes I write about have done. And that's what every single Christian is supposed to do. And so I think there are times when we have to be willing either to lose friends or to offend people. We should never want to or don't care about it. But the point is that it is inevitable that there may be times when that happens. And I think we really have to trust God with that. I mean, if you really are showing the love of Jesus and speaking humbly and not setting yourself up in a certain way, so there's so many different, ways to do this, and everybody is different. I mean, there are people that are called to be vocal about something, and there are other people that they're not, and so that's why, unless you have a real relationship with Jesus, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. So you have to let him lead you. I hope that begins to answer what you were asking. You may have something more specific before we go.
Follow-up. Do you think that in our culture, Christians will ever be seen as, I suppose, what we are for as opposed to what we are fighting against?
And that too is like one of those cliches I've heard over the years, and people say it and it gets applause, like, we need to stop being all about what we're against and about what we're for. And people are like, yeah. Like, well, like, look, I'm against slavery. I'm against butchering the unborn and selling their parts. Should I be ashamed of that? And this is what I'm saying is I think we get all worried, and I think we need to flip it and say, wait a second. The people who are against slavery, you don't think that got pushed back? You don't think that there were 100 arguments like, hey, slavery's been around since the beginning of time, and you're coming in with your religious values and whatever? Shut up. Leave me alone. And Christians said, well, I can't. God compels me to be against slavery. And in the end, we look at them as heroes. And I kind of think that we can't really, I know what you're saying, and it's actually very, very important to me. And I think that the way to that, in a way, is probably at this point more about being muscular Christians rather than, I don't want to offend people, Christians. I think you can go too far in different directions, and I think that because of the moral majority and that kind of stuff, in some ways, maybe we overplayed our hand or we did some things, and then people just react dramatically in the other direction, and they don't want anything to do with politics, and then you open the door to all kinds of horrors, that, reason without God leads to a bloodbath. And so it's just one of those things that I think it's my conviction at this point that it's one thing to be wrong politically or to be to make an idol of politics, but I think we haven't been political enough. The idea that so many Christians didn't vote in the last gubernatorial election, there's no reason that this governor should be the governor. There are enough people who understand that he's a bad choice, but they didn't vote, and now, because of that, we have to clean up the mess. And the mess is churches like this get fined and whatever because they didn't vote. Or maybe because they said, well, politics is beneath me. I'm a Christian. I'm about Jesus. I'm about another kingdom. That's a lot of baloney. You're still here. You're a member of two kingdoms. That's biblical. If Paul says it, I think that's probably pretty biblical, right? So we are dealing with the mess of Christians unwilling to face, just like this president is dealing with the messes that many previous presidents declined to bother with, right? I don't want to deal with China. That's a mess. I'll leave it alone. Let it ride. Oh, well, I don't want to deal with, that problem. I don't want to deal with that problem. Well, when you don't deal with those problems, they grow and grow and grow, and then somebody has to clean up the mess. We would never need a maniac like Donald Trump if the previous presidents had done their jobs. You ever think about that? It's kind of a funny. It's funny, right? I find it funny if George Bush had done a number of things differently, if Clinton had done a number of things differently, if Obama had done a number of things differently, we never would have elected a Donald Trump. But we realized things are so bad, we need that crazy guy who's gonna do it. Because everybody else is kind of I don't know, can we do that? I'm afraid. I don't want to. For example, the situation with NATO, He's totally right. Like, we're getting ripped off. Like, it's no longer 1964. Like, the World War II didn't just end, and we better stand up against Russia, and we better unify, and whatever. Like, that's 1 billion years ago, and we are still kind of stumbling along like that. And he's enough of a nut to kind of look at it and go, what? No, this is wrong. This is wrong. And so he does these things, and he offended Merkel and this and that. And I kind of think, who cares? Like, George, Herbert Walker Bush was living in another time, and but I mean, like, that whole situation was just wrong, and he understands that all the money that we poured into NATO and all that stuff, that's your money. Like, he understands, like, we don't have free money. That's like your money. I have to justify what we're doing, and so he does something that nobody else did. He did it with Israel. I mean, all of the presidents piously said, oh yes, we must move the embassy to Israel. None of them had the courage to do it. That's actually really shameful that Donald Trump has to be the one to do it. And then finally, the biggest issue is that China, on the left, there's always been a tremendous naivete toward evil and communism. But on the right, speaking of the Koch brothers, there has always been a worship of the free market, not understanding, just like with democracy, you can't have freedom and democracy and you can't have a free market unless you have virtue involved. Because the free market can give me better weapons, the free market can give me better drugs, better pornography, the free market will give me whatever I want. It's not moral, but they kind of act like it's moral and it'll go in the right direction. So they thought, hey, if we just open up China, most favored nation status, who cares if they torture Christians and stuff? It's cool. Like, we're going to make a ton of money, and they're going to make money, and they're all going to act like Ben Franklin in a few years because they have a free market, right? So you had naivete on both sides. So this went on and on and on, and a lot of it had to do with greed, with people wanting to make money in China, like the NBA and Nike and whatever. They would do business, obviously, with Nazi Germany or with slave traders. They just want to make money. Like, they don't seem to have any values. They don't care that Uyghur Muslims are being murdered for their organs. I mean, if you have no value except money, what's going to happen? You're going to feed a monster like communist China, which, by the way, is using all of its power to oppress its people, especially its Christians. And then Donald Trump comes in and he looks at the situation and he says, oh, this is really bad. We're getting really ripped off. And he has to do all these crazy things. And all of the prognosticators say, like, oh, what a maniac. Doesn't he understand we're going to have a trade war? We're going to do it. And it really is funny to me because it is an issue of understanding what God is calling you to do now. And I think it has to start with the church. If the church does the right thing and leads, morally speaking, I mean, we ought to have spoken up when, and many did, when we gave China most favored nation status and say, hey, there's a price to pay. They want money, they want to trade with us, they need to change on human rights. They need to do this, they need to do that, and if they don't, no money. But the greed overwhelmed that. And, we realize that as Christians, we have bigger values, more important values than making money. Making money is a good thing. You can do good things with money. But, like, we have to have moral values. And so that's why if the church does not lead on all this stuff, you can't expect the head of the NBA or the head of Nike to get this. But we are supposed to be the conscience of the state, and we're supposed to be the voices that say to those people, you want me to go to NBA games, you want me to buy your sneakers, I will never buy your sneakers if you don't stop using slave labor in China or stop it. In other words, we need to demand these kinds of things. And that was just a very, very long answer. I forgot the question. I apologize. I'm very tired. I'm still in New York time. Thank you so much. Thank all of you. Cooper is going to come up here, I think, and I'm going to be out there to sign books as long as I can stay awake. You really are very kind. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.